All right, so you know how everyone's got an opinion on red meat, right? Like you're trying to enjoy a burger and suddenly it's a whole debate about health risks. So today we're tackling those common beliefs about red meat head on and seeing what the science actually says.
It's interesting you bring that up because we got this YouTube video sent over 11 lies about red meat they want you to believe 2024 by Dr. Ken Berry.
And he goes pretty hard on those observational studies, you know, the ones where they give you a food diary and then blame everything on what you ate last Tuesday.
Right, like how often do you eat red meat and suddenly it's connected to like heart disease or something?
Exactly. And Dr. Berry, by the way, he's a family physician and a big carnivore diet advocate. He basically says those studies are like being served dog food and told it's the best option. Okay, I'll admit that visual made me chuckle, but is he onto something? Are observational studies really that bad?
Think of them like a starting point, not the finish line. They're good at spotting potential links. Like, maybe there's something going on with this food and that health outcome, but they can't prove that one actually causes the other. It's like saying ice cream sales cause crime just because both go up in the summer. You know, there are other factors at play.
So it's not that they're useless, they just can't tell us the whole story.
Exactly. And especially with nutrition research, it's so hard to isolate just one food.
Yeah.
People's diets are all over the place, plus there's lifestyle, genetics, a million other things.
Right, so that study saying red meat leads to inflammation might be missing a lot of context.
Let's talk about inflammation for a sec, because Dr. Berry argues that if red meat was really the culprit, people who eat only meat would be in rough shape.
And he claims there are tons of carnivore dieters out there with low inflammation, himself included.
Right, and that's the key question. Is it the meat itself or other factors? Inflammation is tricky. It's like our body's alarm system, good in small doses, but when it's always going off, that chronic inflammation is linked to all sorts of problems.
So how do we know what's really setting off the alarm?
We need more long-term studies, specifically on carnivore diets. Right now, it's mostly people's personal experiences, which are valid, but don't necessarily reflect the bigger picture.
It's like judging a restaurant on one friend's rave review versus reading hundreds of opinions online. You get a more balanced view that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And with something as complex as long-term inflammation and diet, we need that solid research to draw real conclusions.
So the jury's still out on that one. But shifting gears a bit, Dr. Berry also takes on the idea that red meat is like kryptonite for fertility. He says there's no rock-solid evidence from those randomized controlled trials, the gold standard of research. And he even throws out this thought. If red meat was so bad, wouldn't humans have died out ages ago? Our ancestors ate a ton of it, right?
He's bringing up evolutionary biology, which is fascinating. It's true, our diets have shaped our evolution. Our ancestors relied on meat, especially when plants were scarce.
So cavemen were basically on the carnivore diet out of necessity. But what about now when we have grocery stores and plant-based everything?
That's the key difference. Our bodies and environments have changed a lot since then. Just because they thrived on a certain diet doesn't mean it's the best for us now.
So we can't just copy-paste their lifestyle, even though it worked for them. It's about context, right?
Absolutely. And even with fertility, while some doctors recommend meat-rich diets, it's usually to address specific issues, not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Got it. So if you're worried about red meat and fertility, talk to your doctor. No need to swear off steak just because of a few headlines or a YouTube video.
It is all about that personalized approach.
Yeah. And speaking of personalized, another thing Dr. Berry addresses is the hormone and antibiotic concern. I feel like everyone's got an opinion on that one.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Back in the day, it felt like every other documentary was about factory farming and antibiotics and livestock.
Yeah.
It definitely made me rethink my food choices.
Rightfully so. There were definitely some valid concerns back then about those things ending up in our food. And Dr. Berry even says that was a real issue, but he argues that regulations have changed now. There are washout periods to minimize the antibiotics and hormones. So basically, there's a waiting time between when an animal gets medication and when it can be sold for food.
Yeah, these rules like withdrawal periods for antibiotics are meant to make sure any residues are super low, like way below what would harm a person.
Okay, that makes sense.
No.
But how strictly are these regulations actually enforced? Like, is it different everywhere?
That's the million-dollar question, and unfortunately, there's no easy answer. It really depends on where you are. Different countries have different standards, and even within a country, it can vary from region to region.
So basically, a steak from one farm could have different standards than a steak from another farm, even in the same country.
It's possible, which is why knowing where your food comes from is so important. Consumers are getting more aware and wanting that transparency.
So it's not just about the rules on paper, but also are they actually being followed and enforced? Which honestly is hard to know as a consumer.
It can be. That's why a lot of people are going directly to the source, like local farms or producers who are upfront about their practices. If you're concerned about hormones and antibiotics, that's definitely one way to feel better about your choices.
Knowledge is power, I guess.
Yeah.
The more you know about your food, the better. But let's switch gears again, because Dr. Berry also talks about nutrient density, which I found interesting. He claims red meat is actually a nutritional powerhouse, even more so than some plant-based superfoods. He even had this visual in his video, like a plate of steak next to these tiny portions of blueberries and kale to make his point.
And you know what? Nutritionally speaking, he's not wrong. Red meat does have some essential nutrients that are hard to get from plants alone.
Like what specifically? Give me the rundown.
Well, first off, red meat is packed with iron. And not just any iron, it's heme iron, which our bodies absorb way easier than the non-heme iron found in plants. Then there's zinc, which is crucial for our immune system, wound healing, even our sense of taste and smell. And of course, we can't forget about B vitamins, especially B12. That one's key for energy, nerve function, red blood cells, the whole shebang.
So red meat's got a lot going for it nutritionally. But are we saying everyone should be downing steak at every meal now?
Not quite. It's all about balance. Think of your plate like a seesaw. You need a variety of foods for things to work, right?
So no need to pick a side, more like a yes, A, and D approach to eating.
Exactly. Red meat can definitely be part of a healthy diet. But it's about the bigger picture, making sure you're getting those fruits, veggies, whole grains, all that good stuff too.
Variety is the spice of life, A and D, a healthy diet. It sounds like red meat and health is a pretty nuanced conversation, not as black and white as some people make it seem.
Definitely. And it's easy to get caught up in strong opinions, especially online. But remembering there's always more to the story is key.
Especially with nutrition, it seems like there's a new study every day and everyone's got a different opinion.
Totally. So being a critical thinker is super important. Don't just believe something because it sounds good or fits your current views. Really look into it.
So how do we actually do that with so much information out there? How do we separate the facts from the noise?
Stick to evidence-based info from trustworthy sources. Pay attention to the studies they're using. Are they big, long-term, well-designed? Or are they based on just a few people's experiences, or maybe animal studies that don't really apply to humans? Those are red flags.
It's like trusting a friend's restaurant review versus a professional food critic who's been everywhere, right? You want that expert opinion.
Exactly. And just like with food critics, it's good to get different perspectives on nutrition. Read widely, listen to different experts, and be open to changing your mind.
And maybe take those super strict, restrictive diets with a grain of salt, literally and figuratively.
Couldn't agree more. We're all different. What works for one person might not work for another. But generally, a balanced, varied diet is a good starting point for everyone.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. If you're designing the perfect study to figure out red meat's true impact on health, what would that look like? What would you need to consider to get those clear, reliable answers? It's something to chew on next time you're firing up the grill.